Hello, and welcome to the first video of a 7-part series on how to create a stylized character in Blender. In this tutorial, we will be covering Blender basics, face sculpting, character blockout, clothing and accessory modeling, mesh retopology, UV unwrapping, and texture painting in Blender. This first video will be covering Blender basics and setting up our scene to begin modeling our character. I use to be able to have the hotkey setup that I'm comfortable with. I definitely encourage everybody who's watching to play around with Blender and figure out what hotkey setup works best for them. This is just personally what works best for me. I'm going to begin by going over some basic controls and how to move around in your scene. So to start, I use Alt and middle mouse button to pan around the scene. If you select on an object and hold Alt and left click, you can rotate around that object. The screen will rotate around whatever the center of your screen is. So if you hold Alt and left click here, you can see we're rotating around the center of our screen. But if we want to rotate around the object again, select it, click on F to center it, and then that will be the thing that our screen rotates around. To move our object, we have a few different options. Press W to get control of the transforms, E to control the rotation, and R to control the scale. I'm going to be going over some of the different tabs and the different options we have in Blender. First, we have the modeling tab, which is just used to control vertices, faces, and do general modeling. The sculpting tab, where we have a little bit more free control over how we want to interact with our object. The UV editing tab, which will be used to UV unwrap our object, which will help us when we're texturing. The texture paint tab, which can be used to paint on our object when we're creating the materials and textures for our character. The shading tab, which gives us a little bit more control of our materials and our lighting for when we're rendering the object or character. The animation tab, where we can animate our object or character. The rendering tab, which is where we can see our render as it's happening. The compositing tab, which can be used for post-processing effects on an image. And the scripting tab, which is used if you have any sort of specific functionality that you need to be applied to your object or scene. Next, I'm going to be going over the different tabs we have here on the right-hand side. The first few tabs we have are just controlling our render settings. The next tab we have here is our object settings tab, where we can see our object's transforms and control how we are able to see our object in the viewport. As you can see here, when I move the object side to side, its transforms are affected, same as the scale and rotation. Next we have the modifiers tab, which has a lot of different options, some of which we will be using for our character. The next tab is the particle effects tab, which can be used for creating simulations of fire, wind, smoke, etc., other visual effects. The physical properties tab, which can be used to simulate a physical interaction in our environment or on our object. The next is the object constraints tab, which can be used to add constraints to how your object interacts with itself, with other objects, or within the scene. The object data properties tab, which can be used to set up vertex groups. So you can see here, if I add a vertex group for this face, assign it, I can deselect and select it at will, which is very helpful for if we're working with a lot of geometry and need to be selecting and deselecting different groups. And finally, we have the materials property tab, which can be used to assign a material to our object. Alright, so to begin setting our scene up, we're going to start by setting a scale. And to do that, we're going to enter the front mode, and we're going to select everything in the scene and delete. And we're going to start by creating a cylinder, which we will use to help determine our scale. And I've turned on absolute grid snapping so that we can have exact measurements. And I'll just move that up like this, one time. Now we want to go to our measuring tool. We're going to make our character around 1.8 meters tall. That's a little bit tall for a normal human male, but since our character is more stylized and a warrior, we're going to make him a very large character. So now that we have the 2 meters set, we're going to bring down the height of our cylinder until we get it to 1.8 meters. So to do that, I'm just going to into face selection mode, turn on wireframe so I can select the top and bring that down 2 notches. Now we can go back into object mode, select our measuring tool, check it. Now we're at 1.8 meters. So now when we bring in our reference images, we can set them up to be the proper height. All right, so now that we have our scale set up, we're going to add in our reference images. And these reference images are set up so that when you line them up with each other, they're all evenly at the same height, which is very helpful when modeling a character. So as you can see here, I'm just lining up our character with the height of our cylinder. I'm going to go into the side view and just pull this forward. And I place the front-facing image in the front-facing view in my scene. Now we're going to go into the right side view to place our side image, the reference. Scale that down so that it fits our designated height. Now I'm going to go into the back view and we're going to add in our final reference images, or image rather, which is the back. Going to scale him down to fit our height. All right, great. Now you can see when we go into our perspective view here, we have all of our different reference images. I'm going to turn off grid snapping just so that I can adjust these a little bit more freely. We are finished with our scale since we've already set the height of our references, so we can just delete that. Now I'm going to set these up so that they line up with each other fairly well, and depending on which image you need at what time, you can set them active on and off like this. I'm just going to leave them all active for the time being because we're going to be working with all of them. Alright, so now we have our character set up and we can start modeling.